hell let this black woman into my daughter's wedding?
I was invited.
Invited? What's next? Stray dogs get a seat, too.
My name is on the guest list.
Who? A guest list isn't a food stamp line, sweetheart.
Patricia grabbed the chair and yanked it away.
Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of. Animals don't sit with people.
Audrey's jaw tightened. She pulled another chair, sat down.
Call security. I want this thing removed.
300 guests heard that word. Not one flinched. They all avoided the black woman at the wedding, until the groom grabbed the mic, said her name, and the room went so quiet, you could hear Patricia's heart stop. The Ashford estate. 11 acres of white roses and old money. Crystal chandeliers hung from the open-air pavilion like frozen rain. The air smelled of jasmine and privilege. That was where Audrey Wells walked in. Alone. Navy dress, flat shoes. No jewelry. No +1. Just a small leather purse and an invitation she'd been sent 3 months ago. The valet had looked at that invitation like it was written in a language he'd never seen, checked it twice, ran his thumb across the embossed letters. He let her through, but his hand stayed on his earpiece the whole time. Inside, Patricia Ashford had spotted her within 30 seconds. And now, after the scene at the entrance, the damage was already done. Audrey sat at table 3. 8 place settings. Crystal vase filled with white peonies. 4 seats from the head table. She smoothed the napkin across her lap and aligned her fork with the knife. The couple to her left, charcoal suit, pearl necklace, exchanged one look. The woman grabbed her clutch. The man finished his wine in a single swallow. They left without a word. Their chairs scraped across the stone like a verdict. A second couple followed. The woman picked up her place card and carried it to another table without even glancing back. Audrey sat alone at a table set for 8. Waiters in white gloves circled with trays of smoked salmon and truffle crostini. They served the table to her left. They served the table to her right. They walked past table 3 like it didn't exist. She reached into her purse. One notification on her phone. A message from a contact saved as E. Can't wait for you to meet everyone. Save me a dance. Something softened behind her eyes. A warmth that had no business being in this room. She read it twice. Then she locked the screen, slipped the phone back, and folded her hands on the white tablecloth. 300 people around her, laughing, clinking glasses, hugging, living their beautiful evening, and one woman sitting still in the center of all of it. Patient, quiet, like someone who had arrived early to a place that didn't yet know it belonged to her. Near the service entrance, Gerald, the event coordinator, pressed 2 fingers to his earpiece. Patricia was already walking toward him, heels clicking on the stone. I want her gone before the first toast. Handle it. Gerald nodded. He didn't ask questions. He never did. Cocktail hour started at 6. The sun dipped behind the estate's oak trees and turned the garden gold. Guests migrated toward the bar, a hand-carved mahogany station serving drinks that cost more per glass than most people made in a day. Audrey stayed at table 3. She wasn't hiding. She was waiting. Her phone sat face down on the tablecloth, the message from E still glowing underneath like a small, quiet promise. But Patricia Ashford wasn't waiting for anything. She was working the room, a woman on a mission, dressed in silver silk and a smile sharp enough to cut glass. She found Gerald by the bar. Why is she still here? Gerald shifted his weight. Ma'am, her name is on the list, table 3. She was placed there by, I don't care who placed her. Move her. Move her where? 14, back corner, near the kitchen. Gerald hesitated. Table 14 was the staff overflow, half hidden behind a pillar next to the swinging door where plates crashed and busboys yelled. It wasn't a guest table. It was a storage area with a tablecloth. Mrs. Ashford, that table isn't really— Did I stutter? Gerald took Audrey's place card from table 3 and walked it to the back of the room without another word. 10 minutes later, a waiter appeared at Audrey's side. Young kid, maybe 19. He couldn't quite meet her eyes. "Ma'am, there's been a seating change. You've been reassigned to table 14. Audrey looked at him. She didn't look angry. She looked like someone who had been reassigned before. Many times. In many rooms. "Where is table 14? The waiter pointed toward the back, past the bar, past the dance floor, past every table where anyone who mattered was sitting. All the way to the corner where the kitchen door swung open every 40 seconds with a bang. "I see," Audrey said. She picked up her purse, stood, walked the entire length of the pavilion, every step watched by dozens of eyes that pretended not to see her. The walk felt longer than it was. 60 feet of white linen and turned backs. She pulled out the chair at table 14 and sat down. Alone again. This time next to the smell of dish soap and the sound of breaking plates. The tablecloth here was thinner. The flowers were fake. The chandelier light barely reached this corner, just a pale glow that made the silverware look dull. 2 women at the next table, Diane and Margaret, both dripping in gold, watched her sit down. Diane leaned over. She didn't even bother to whisper. "I heard Patricia had to move her. Apparently she just showed up. No husband, no family. Nobody knows her. Can you imagine the audacity?" Margaret stirred her cocktail. "Probably looking for a free meal. You know how they are. Give them an inch and they take the whole buffet. Someone should check the gift table. Just saying." They clinked glasses and laughed, a bright, careless sound that cut through the kitchen noise like a bell. Audrey heard every word. She was 4 feet away. Her fingers tightened around the napkin in her lap. The fabric creased under her grip. But her face stayed still. Perfectly, impossibly still. She had learned that stillness a long time ago, in rooms just like this one. A waiter passed with champagne. Margaret reached out and took 2 glasses without breaking her conversation. The waiter walked past Audrey without stopping, without looking. Like table 14 was empty. At the head table, Patricia sat down next to her husband, Howard. She kissed his cheek and adjusted her diamond bracelet. "It's handled," she said. Howard glanced toward the back of the room. He could see Audrey, barely, behind the pillar. A navy dress in a sea of silver and white. "Who is she?" he asked. "Nobody," Patricia said. "Absolutely nobody." She lifted her champagne flute. The crystal caught the chandelier light and scattered it across the tablecloth like tiny stars. "To Vanessa and Ethan," she said. The table raised their glasses. Nobody toasted the woman sitting alone by the kitchen. Nobody noticed her phone light up. Another message from E. "Almost done with photos. Where are you sitting? Can't find you at table 3. Audrey typed back 2 words. "Table 14. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. No reply came, but somewhere behind the bridal suite doors, a man in a tuxedo read those 2 words, and his hand closed into a fist. Dinner was served at 7:15. The pavilion shifted from cocktail chatter to the controlled hum of silverware on porcelain. Filet mignon with truffle butter, roasted asparagus in lemon glaze, a wine list that read like a love letter to Bordeaux. Table 14 got nothing. Audrey watched the waiters move through the pavilion like a choreographed machine. One table, next table, next table. Skip. Every time they passed her corner, their eyes stayed fixed on some invisible point just above her head. Like she was furniture. Like the seat was empty. She caught one waiter's sleeve as he passed. "Excuse me, could I get a plate?" The kid froze. Looked at her. Looked over his shoulder toward the head table where Patricia was watching with one eyebrow raised. He swallowed hard. I'll check with my manager, he said. He never came back. Nobody came back. 40 minutes into dinner, and every guest in the pavilion had food on their plate, wine in their glass, and someone to talk to. Audrey had an empty plate, an empty glass, and the sound of the kitchen door banging behind her every 40 seconds. She sat there anyway, hands folded, napkin pressed flat, like she was waiting for a meal she already knew wasn't coming. Then Craig Ashford showed up, Patricia's nephew, 32, finance bro, pink shirt with the collar popped, a bourbon in one hand, and a grin that said he had never once been told no in his entire life. He leaned against the pillar, blocking what little light reached her corner. "So you're the one Aunt Pat's all worked up about. Can I help you?" "Nah, just curious." He swirled his bourbon, looked her up and down like she was something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. "What's a girl like you doing at an event like this? I mean, come on. The dress, the people. This whole thing is a little above your pay grade. You know that, right?" Audrey's voice was flat. "I know exactly what world this is." "Right. Sure you do." He took a sip, smacked his lips. "Look, nobody here knows you. Nobody here wants to know you. You're sitting alone at this sad little table in the back with no food, no drink, no man. It's pathetic. Like a stray parked outside a restaurant window hoping someone drops a scrap." He laughed. Nobody stopped him. "My advice? Leave. Quietly. Before it gets worse." "Are you done?" "Almost." He leaned in. His cologne was sharp and expensive and suffocating. "My aunt paid $400,000 for this wedding. She doesn't want your kind in the background of a single photo. And what Aunt Pat wants, Aunt Pat gets." He straightened up, adjusted his collar, turned to leave. His elbow caught the wine glass on the table's edge. A full pour of Chateau Margaux splashed across the front of Audrey's navy dress. The dark red stain bloomed across the fabric like a wound opening in slow motion. Craig looked down. His eyes went wide for exactly half a second. Then the corner of his mouth twitched upward. Oops. 2 tables away, someone gasped. Then someone laughed. Then the gasps became whispers, and the whispers became silence. Because nobody wanted to be the person who said something. Audrey looked down at the stain spreading across her chest. The dress was finished. She knew it. Everyone in the room knew it. She picked up the cloth napkin, dabbed once, twice, set it down, folded it into a perfect square beside the empty plate. Her hands were shaking. Not a lot, but enough that the napkin trembled in her fingers before she let go. She looked at Craig, looked straight through him, and said one word. "Oops." Craig's smirk vanished. Something behind her eyes made him step back, just half a step, and he walked away faster than he'd come. Then Patricia arrived. She came to table 14 like a woman delivering a verdict. Silver silk, diamonds, champagne still in hand. She stood over Audrey the way a person stands over something they're about to discard. "I've been patient. I've been polite. But let me be very clear." She leaned in close enough for Audrey to count the diamonds on her necklace. "You are not welcome here. You were never wanted here. Whatever little fantasy you had about sitting with these people and pretending you belong, it's done. Look at yourself." Her eyes dropped to the wine stain. "You're a mess. You're an embarrassment. And if you had any shred of dignity left, you would walk yourself out that door before someone has to drag you." Audrey held her gaze. 5 seconds. 10. "Are you finished?" Same words she'd said to Craig. Same tone. Same terrifying stillness. Patricia straightened up faster than she'd intended. Something about Audrey's eyes. No anger, no tears, no flinch, unsettled her in a way she couldn't name. "Vanessa," she called over her shoulder. Come handle this." She walked away, heels cracking against the stone like gunshots. Audrey sat alone, wine stain across her chest, empty plate. Kitchen door banging, but she was still sitting, still there, still breathing. And behind the bridal suite doors, a phone buzzed, a message that read, "Table 14. Ethan Brooks read those 2 words, and for the first time all evening, the groom stopped smiling. Vanessa Brooks, formerly Vanessa Ashford, in about 45 minutes, crossed the pavilion with the kind of walk that only a bride at her own wedding could pull off. Chin up, veil trailing, every eye in the room tracking her like she was the sun. She reached table 14 and stopped. She didn't sit down. She stood with her arms folded across her Vera Wang bodice and looked at Audrey the way someone looks at a stain on their favorite couch. "Look," Vanessa said, "I don't know who you are. I don't know how you got in, but my mother is losing her mind. My guests are uncomfortable, and I am not going to let some random woman ruin the biggest day of my life." Audrey looked up. The wine stain on her dress had dried to a dark, ugly patch across her chest. She didn't try to hide it. "I'm not ruining anything," she said. "You're ruining everything." Vanessa's voice cracked, not with sadness, but with the sharp edge of someone who was used to getting what she wanted and couldn't understand why this one thing wasn't cooperating. "Do you have any idea how much planning went into this? Any idea what this night means to my family?" "I have some idea," Audrey said. Something flickered across her face, a shadow of something Vanessa was too angry to notice. "Then leave, please. I'm asking nicely. Once." Audrey looked at her for a long moment. The bride was 28, beautiful, flushed, terrified of imperfection. For just a second, something close to pity moved through Audrey's eyes, quick and quiet, like a bird passing over water. "I'll stay until the speeches," Audrey said. "Then I'll go." Vanessa exhaled through her nose. She wanted to scream. You could see it in the tendons of her neck, in the white knuckles gripping her bouquet. But she was a bride. She was being photographed. She couldn't scream. "Fine," she hissed. "But if you say one word, one single word during my reception, I will personally have you removed. Are we clear?" "Crystal," Audrey said. Vanessa turned and walked away. The veil swept behind her like a white curtain closing on a stage. Audrey watched her go. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, not to text, not to call. She opened her photos. The picture was old, slightly blurred. A 12-year-old boy, rail-thin, oversized t-shirt, standing on the porch of a house with boarded windows and a sagging roof. He was squinting into the sun. His sneakers had holes in them. His jeans were 2 inches too short. Next to him stood a younger Audrey, 30-something, same calm eyes, same straight back. Her arm was around the boy's shoulder, not posed, not stiff, natural, like she'd been standing there a long time, like she'd stand there as long as he needed. She stared at the photo. Her thumb hovered over the boy's face. That boy was somewhere in this venue right now. Grown, 30 years old, wearing a tuxedo that cost more than the house in the picture. About to give a speech to 300 people who loved him, and he had no idea what they'd done to her. Audrey locked her phone, slipped it back into her purse, folded her hands. At the head table, the wedding coordinator tapped a glass. The room began to settle. Chairs scraped. Conversations dimmed. The string quartet played its final note, and the silence that followed was thick enough to hold. Ethan appeared from behind the bridal suite doors. He walked into the pavilion, and every head turned toward him. Tall, clean-shaven, tuxedo fitted like it was sewn onto his body. He smiled at the crowd, a wide, easy, charming smile that made the women sigh and the men nod. But his eyes were scanning the room. He looked at table 3, empty. His brow creased. He looked past the dance floor, past the bar, past the pillars and the flower arrangements and the sea of white faces. And then he saw her. Table 14. Back corner. Alone. Wine stain on her dress. Hands folded, sitting in the shadow of a pillar next to the kitchen door. Ethan's smile vanished, not slowly, not gradually. It disappeared the way light leaves a room when someone flips a switch. His jaw tightened. His hand gripped the edge of the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked at Vanessa, then at Patricia, then back at Audrey. And something in his eyes changed. Something shifted from Groom to something else entirely. Something that made Gerald, standing by the service entrance with his clipboard, take one step backward. Ethan adjusted the microphone. "Before I begin," he said, and his voice was steady, but his eyes were not. "There's something I need to say." The room leaned forward. Ethan didn't start with a toast. He didn't start with a joke. He didn't thank the caterers, or compliment the flowers, or say how beautiful the bride looked. He started with a question. "How many of you know where I grew up?" The room was quiet. A few guests shifted. Someone coughed. "I'll tell you. I grew up at 114 Birch Street in Millfield. If you don't know Millfield, good for you. It's the kind of place people drive through with their doors locked, boarded up houses, empty lots. The nearest grocery store was 4 miles away, and it closed in 2009. He let the silence sit. "When I was 12, my father lost everything. His business, his savings, our house. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. The heat didn't work, the ceiling leaked. My dad slept on the floor because there was only one bed, and he gave it to me." Patricia's smile was frozen solid. Howard shifted in his chair. "My mother left 6 months later, packed a bag while I was at school, and was gone before I got home. My dad tried to explain it that night. Halfway through, he stopped talking. He sat on the kitchen floor and didn't get up for 3 days." The pavilion was dead silent. No silverware, no whispers, no clinking glass. When I say everything was gone, I mean everything. My dad stopped eating. I was 12 years old stealing cereal from the corner store because there was nothing in the apartment. My shoes had holes. I wore the same jeans every day because they were the only pair I had. Ethan's voice held steady, almost too steady. The slight tremor in his left hand was the only thing that gave him away. Then, one day, someone knocked on our door. He looked toward table 14, a woman I had never met. My dad had never met her either. She worked with a community foundation that helped families in crisis. A neighbor had told her about us. She showed up with groceries, not the cheap stuff, real food, milk, fresh bread, chicken, vegetables. She put it all on the counter, looked at my dad sitting on that kitchen floor, and said 5 words. His voice cracked, just barely. "You don't have to explain." He gripped the podium. She came back the next day, and the next. She got my dad into a treatment program. She paid our rent, not for a month or 2, for 3 years. She enrolled me in a real school, the kind with textbooks that weren't falling apart and teachers who showed up. Patricia had gone from frozen to gray. Her champagne sat untouched. Howard stared at the tablecloth like it might swallow him. When I got into college, she paid for it. Every semester, every book, every meal plan. She never asked for anything, never wanted credit, never wanted her name on a building or a plaque. He looked across 300 faces, some confused, some uncomfortable, some beginning to understand. When I got into medical school, she called. Not texted, called. And she said something I will never forget. "I didn't do this so you could thank me." I did this because someone should have done it for me, and nobody did. He stopped, breathed. His eyes were wet, but his jaw was iron. That woman is in this room tonight. Guests started looking around, at each other, at nearby tables, searching. She's sitting at table 14, every head turned toward the back corner, past the dance floor, past the bar, past the pillars. And there she was. Audrey Wells. Wine stain across her chest, empty plate in front of her, hands folded. Alone in the shadow of a kitchen door. Her name, Ethan said, is Audrey Wells. The room didn't gasp. It didn't murmur. 300 people inhaled at the same time and forgot to breathe out. She is the founder and CEO of Wells Hartley Pharmaceuticals. A sound moved through the crowd. Not a gasp, but something deeper. A recognition. Wells Hartley was a name every person in that room knew. A $2.3 billion company. The name on hospital wings and research grants and Forbes covers. She's the reason I'm standing here. She's the reason I'm alive. She's my godmother. The only person who showed up when everyone else disappeared. He looked at Patricia, then at Vanessa. His voice didn't rise. It dropped, low, controlled, more dangerous than any shout. And I would very much like to know why she is sitting alone at a table by the kitchen with wine on her dress and no food on her plate. Nobody moved. Patricia's hand reached for her champagne and closed around air. Her fingers trembled against the tablecloth. Vanessa's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Her bouquet slipped from her grip and hit the floor with a soft, dead sound. Gerald stepped behind the pillar, trying to disappear. Diane pressed her napkin to her mouth. Margaret wouldn't look up from her plate. Craig stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor, halfway to the bathroom, trapped between the exit and 300 pairs of eyes that suddenly saw exactly who he was. His pink collar was wilting. His bourbon was gone. He looked like a man who had just realized the ground beneath him was made of glass. The silence lasted 11 seconds. It felt like 11 years. Audrey sat at table 14. She hadn't moved. She was looking straight at Ethan with the same quiet, steady eyes she'd had all night. And for the first time, the very first time, those eyes were full of tears. Not shame, not vindication. Just love. The kind that doesn't need an audience. The kind that shows up at a door with groceries and asks for nothing in return. Ethan steps down from the podium. He didn't walk to the head table. He didn't walk to his bride. He walked straight down the center of the pavilion, past table 1, past table 5, past table 9, all the way to the back corner where the kitchen door was still banging and the chandelier light barely reached. He stopped in front of table 14. 300 people turned in their chairs to watch. Audrey looked up at him. The wine stain had dried into a dark map across her chest. Her eyes were still wet. Her hands were still folded. She hadn't moved from that chair in 3 hours. Ethan knelt down. Not bent over, knelt. One knee on the cold stone floor, his tuxedo pressing into the ground. He took her hands in both of his. "I'm sorry," he whispered. But the microphone was still on. Every person in that room heard it. "I didn't know. I didn't know they did this to you." Audrey shook her head. A tear broke loose and ran down her cheek. She caught it with the back of her hand, fast, like she'd been catching tears her whole life and was tired of it. "Don't apologize for them," she said. "You never had to apologize for anyone." Ethan stood. He pulled her to her feet, and then he hugged her. The kind of hug that has years inside it, The kind that remembers a 12-year-old boy with holes in his shoes standing on a porch next to the only person who stayed. The room watched. Nobody breathed. Ethan turned back toward the podium, his arm still around Audrey's shoulder. He walked her forward, past table 9, past table 5, past table 1, retracing every step of the exile in reverse. This time she wasn't walking to the back. She was walking to the front. He pulled out the chair at the head table. His chair, right next to the bride's seat. "Sit here," he said. Audrey looked at the chair, then at the head table, then at Patricia, who was sitting 3 seats away with a face the color of ash. "Ethan, I don't need— You've been sitting alone all night. You're sitting with me now." She sat down, at the head table, in the groom's chair, with a wine-stained dress and flat shoes and no jewelry, surrounded by diamonds and silk and 300 people who now couldn't look her in the eye. Ethan walked back to the podium. He gripped the mic. The tenderness was gone from his voice now. What replaced it was something harder, something forged. "I want to say something else," he said, "and I want everyone to hear it." The room braced. "The woman sitting at my table right now has donated more money to hospitals, schools, and shelters than everyone in this room combined. She has funded 14 community clinics across this state. She has personally paid for the education of over 200 children who had nothing, just like I had nothing." He looked at Patricia. "She paid for this venue." Patricia's lips parted. "She paid for the flowers." Howard closed his eyes. "She paid for the catering, the string quartet, the champagne you've been drinking all night." A glass hit a table somewhere. The sound was louder than it should have been. "She paid for the dress." Every eye went to Vanessa. The bride sat frozen. Her Vera Wang gown, the one she'd spent 4 months choosing, the one she'd posted on Instagram, the one she'd called perfect, suddenly felt like it was made of someone else's kindness. And it was. "I asked her to help because I wanted this day to be beautiful for my wife. She said yes in 4 seconds. She didn't ask for a seat at the head table. She didn't ask for a thank you speech. She asked for one thing." Ethan's voice dropped. "She asked to come, to see the man I'd become, to meet the family I'd married into." He let that land. "And this is what you showed her." The words hit the room like a stone dropped into still water. The ripples moved outward, table by table, face by face. Shame spreading like the wine stain on Audrey's dress. Diane put her head in her hands. Margaret stood up and walked toward the bathroom. She didn't make it. She stopped at the edge of the dance floor and just stood there, staring at the ground. Craig had disappeared entirely. His chair at his table sat empty, his bourbon glass still sweating on the linen. Gerald was gone too. The clipboard was on the ground by the service entrance. He hadn't even picked it up. Patricia sat 3 seats from Audrey at the head table. 3 seats and a universe apart. Her silver dress caught the light, but the shine looked different now, like something polished to hide what was underneath. Her hands were in her lap. Her diamond bracelet sparkled against fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. She opened her mouth to speak. Nothing came. Howard reached for her hand under the table. She pulled it away. Vanessa sat in her bridal chair, tears running down her face. Not the pretty, photogenic tears of a happy bride. These were the ugly kind. The ones that come when you realize something about yourself that you can't unrealize. She looked at Audrey, 3 seats away. The woman she'd told to leave. The woman she'd called a random nobody. The woman who had paid for every petal, every note, every thread of the dress that was now damp with tears. Audrey wasn't looking at any of them. She was looking at Ethan. And she was smiling. A small, quiet, unbreakable smile that had survived everything this room had thrown at it. "I'm proud of you," she said, soft enough that only the people at the head table heard it. "I've always been proud of you." Ethan's composure broke. His eyes filled. He pressed his lips together hard and nodded, the kind of nod that holds back everything a man wants to say, but can't. The string quartet sat with their bows in their laps. They didn't play. There was no music for this moment. The silence after Ethan's speech lasted long enough to become its own kind of punishment. Then the room cracked open. It started with small, private implosions. A woman at table 6 pressed her napkin to her face and wouldn't look up. A man at table 2 pushed his chair back and left without telling his wife where he was going. A couple near the bar stood together, set down their glasses, and walked out the garden exit without a word. Nobody was laughing anymore. Nobody was whispering. The pavilion that had buzzed with champagne confidence an hour ago now sat heavy and airless, like a church after a confession nobody wanted to hear. Patricia was the first to move. She stood from her chair at the head table, slowly, like a woman who wasn't sure her legs would hold. She smoothed her silver dress with shaking hands. She walked 3 seats down to where Audrey sat in Ethan's chair. She stopped, opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. I didn't know." Her voice was thin, stripped. "Nobody told me who you were. If I had known—" "If you had known what?" Audrey turned to look at her. "You would have been kind? You would have offered me a seat? You would have treated me like a person?" Patricia blinked. Yes, of course." "Then that's the problem, Patricia. Not that you didn't know my name, but that you needed to know my name before you'd treat me like a human being." The words landed in the room like stones dropped into deep water. No splash, just the slow, heavy sinking that everyone felt in their chest. Patricia stood there. Her mouth worked, but nothing came out. A tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it fast, angry at herself for letting it fall. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "I am truly sorry." Audrey looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. Not warmth, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. The way you nod at someone who has a very long road ahead of them and knows it. Howard appeared behind his wife. He put a hand on her shoulder. He looked at Audrey with the expression of a man who had watched the whole thing happen and said nothing, and was only now realizing that silence was its own kind of cruelty. "Mrs. Wells," he said, "I should have." "Yes," Audrey said, "you should have." He had nothing to add to that. He guided Patricia back to her seat. She sat down like a woman 10 years older than she'd been an hour ago. Then came Vanessa. The bride walked to Audrey on legs that barely held her. Her mascara had left dark tracks down both cheeks. The Vera Wang gown, Audrey's gift, though Vanessa hadn't known that an hour ago, dragged against the stone floor like it weighed 100 pounds more than it had that morning. She stopped in front of Audrey. She tried to speak. What came out was barely a whisper. "I told you to leave." "You did." "I said you didn't belong here." "You did." I didn't even—" Vanessa's voice broke. She pressed both hands over her mouth. Her shoulders shook. "I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I didn't know." "You didn't know what?" Audrey's voice was gentle now. Not sharp, not angry. Gentle the way a teacher is gentle when the lesson is painful but necessary. "That I was rich? That I paid for your dress? That I funded your husband's education?" She paused. "None of that should have mattered. I could have been nobody. I could have been exactly what you thought I was, a woman with no money and no connections who showed up alone in a cheap dress. And you still should have offered me a glass of water." Vanessa's knees buckled. She sank into the chair next to Audrey. a bride in a $10,000 gown collapsing next to a woman in a wine-stained dress from a department store. "I know," Vanessa whispered. "I know." Audrey reached out. She took Vanessa's hand, held it. The bride flinched, then gripped back hard, like a person holding onto a rope over a cliff. "You're young," Audrey said. "You have time. But your time starts now. Not tomorrow, not when it's convenient. Now." Vanessa nodded, tears falling onto the tablecloth, dark spots blooming on the white linen like small, quiet confessions. Across the pavilion, the guests were rearranging themselves around a new reality. Some were crying. Some were staring at their phones, texting, perhaps, or just looking for somewhere to put their eyes. The photographer had lowered his camera 20 minutes ago and hadn't raised it since. Diane sat alone at her table. Margaret hadn't come back from wherever she'd gone. The gold jewelry they'd been so proud of earlier now felt heavy. Diane unclasped her bracelet and put it in her purse. She didn't know why. It just felt wrong to wear it. Gerald returned to the service entrance and picked up his clipboard. His hands were shaking. He'd spent 15 years coordinating events for wealthy families. He'd moved guests before, quietly, efficiently, without question. It was part of the job. Tonight was the first time he understood what the job actually cost. Craig never came back to the pavilion. His chair stayed empty for the rest of the night. The next morning, Patricia would find a text from him that said only, "I'm sorry about tonight." She wouldn't reply. She wouldn't know how. And Ethan stood at the podium. Mic off now. Just standing there, watching his godmother hold his wife's hand at the head table. His eyes were dry. His face was calm. But his hand rested on the podium's edge, and his fingers were pressing so hard into the wood that his nails left marks. He had wanted this day to be the happiest of his life. Instead, it became the most important. He stepped away from the podium, walked to the head table, and sat down next to Audrey. On her other side, Vanessa. Across from them, Patricia and Howard. Nobody spoke. But for the first time all night, nobody left. Audrey reached into her purse. She pulled out a white envelope and placed it on the table in front of Ethan. "Open it later," she said. He looked at it, then at her. Then he put his hand over hers and squeezed. "Thank you," he said. "For everything. For always." 6 months later, a small clinic opened on the corner of Birch Street and Maple Avenue in Millfield. It wasn't much to look at. Single-story brick building, glass front door, a small parking lot with 8 spaces. The kind of place you'd drive past without noticing, unless you needed it. And in Millfield, almost everyone needed it. The sign above the door read, "The Wells Community Health Clinic. Free care for all. No questions asked." Ethan Brooks stood at the front entrance on opening day in a white coat with his name stitched over the pocket. He'd left his position at a private practice in the city 3 months earlier. His colleagues had thought he was crazy. His former boss had called it career suicide. Ethan called it the only thing that made sense. The envelope Audrey had left at the head table contained a check for $500,000. No conditions, no strings. Just a note in her handwriting that said, "Build what you always talked about. I'll be your first patient." She was. Opening day, 9 in the morning. She walked through the front door in a simple dress and flat shoes, the same way she'd walked into the wedding. Except this time, every person in the room stood up, not because they knew her name, not because they knew her net worth, because Ethan had told his staff one thing about the woman who funded the clinic. She's the reason any of this exists, and she's the reason I'm the man I am. Audrey sat in the waiting room chair and filled out her paperwork like every other patient. When the receptionist offered to skip her ahead, she shook her head. "I'll wait my turn," she said. and she meant it. Vanessa was there too, not as a patient, as a volunteer. She'd started coming to Millfield 2 months before the clinic opened. At first, she helped organize supply closets and paint walls. Then she started answering phones. Then she began driving patients home who didn't have cars, elderly women with walkers, single mothers with 3 kids in the back seat, teenagers who'd never been to a doctor because they'd never had insurance. She didn't talk about it on Instagram. She didn't post photos. She didn't tell her friends. When Audrey walked in on opening day, Vanessa was standing behind the front desk in jeans and a clinic t-shirt. No Vera Wang. No diamonds. No veil. Their eyes met. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it. There were still things she hadn't found the words for. Maybe she never would. Audrey walked up to the desk and slid her paperwork across the counter. "Nice shirt," she said. Vanessa laughed. A small, surprised, watery laugh that cracked something open in her chest. She took the paperwork and placed it in the tray. "Nice shoes," she said back. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a door, cracked open, light coming through. And sometimes that's enough to start. Patricia sent a letter 2 weeks after the wedding. 4 pages, handwritten. Audrey read every word. She didn't respond, not by mail, not by phone, not by text. 3 months later, she responded in person. She showed up at the Ashford home on a Sunday evening. Patricia opened the door herself. No staff, no pretense. She was wearing a sweater and reading glasses, and for the first time, she looked like a person instead of a performance. They sat in the kitchen, not the formal dining room, the kitchen. Patricia made coffee, badly because she'd never made her own coffee before, and set it on the table between them. They talked for 2 hours. What was said stayed between them, but when Audrey left, Patricia walked her to the car. And at the door, she did something she hadn't done at the wedding. She offered Audrey her hand. Audrey took it. It wasn't a hug. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a handshake between 2 women who understood that some bridges don't get rebuilt in a day. They get rebuilt, one board at a time. Howard resigned from 2 of his club memberships the following month. He never explained why. He didn't need to. Diane stopped wearing gold to events. Small thing, but the people who knew her noticed. Gerald left the event coordination business. He went back to school at 43, enrolled in a social work program. He told his wife it was because of something that happened at a wedding. He never said more than that. Craig never apologized in person. But 6 months after the wedding, a donation appeared in the Wells Clinic's account. Anonymous. Exactly $400,000. The same number he'd thrown at Audrey's face that night. The same number that now paid for an entire pediatric wing. Audrey noticed the amount. She didn't say anything. Some apologies don't need a reply. They just need to exist. And Ethan treated his first patient at 9:15 on opening day, a 7-year-old boy with an ear infection. No insurance, no money. A mother who'd driven 40 minutes because every other clinic had turned them away. Ethan knelt down, the same way he'd knelt in front of Audrey at table 14, and looked the boy in the eye. "What's your name, buddy?" "James." "Okay, James, I'm Dr. Brooks, and I'm going to take care of you. That's a promise." The boy's mother started crying, not because of the ear infection, because someone had finally said yes. That's what Audrey built. Not a company, not a fortune. A world where someone says yes when everyone else says no. If this story made you feel something, drop a comment. Tell me, what would you have done if you were in that room? Would you have stayed silent like everyone else? Or would you have been the one to pull out a chair? Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're not subscribed yet, you know what to do.
300 people, and not one needed to know all we named to offer her a glass of water, but they did need it, and that the path that should haunt you. Patricia said, if I had known, I would have been kind. Think about what that really means. Kindness was right there. She just locked it behind a gate that made always show a password to get in. That's not a mistake. That's a choice to treat dignity like currency only certain people carry, but all reveal an entire life on the opposite belief. She showed up at the stranger door with rosary and said, you don't have to explain. She paid for a wedding that didn't want her. She sat in that chair for 3 hours, not because she couldn't leave, but because love doesn't wait for permission to show up. So ask yourself this, if dignity is something every person is born with, why do we keep making people prove they deserve it? And when you were the one sitting alone at table 14 who pulled out a chair for you, drop that in the comment. Share this with someone who needs it. I'll see you in the next one.